It doesn't matter what day you're watching this. I can almost guarantee somewhere in some rugby club, somewhere in the world, the words have been uttered. Of course, once the USA takes the game seriously. For over 50 years, America has been spoken of in rugby circles as a sleeping giant, a force ready to be awakened all so soon once the conditions are right and ready, an inevitability. And rugby has been spoken of in American sporting circles as what's that? Breaking America has sat about item 5 or 6 on the sports to-do list since the Cold War, and yet in many ways the American expansion has always been rugby's own equivalent of the big nuclear sit-about. Endless talk, preparation and fret, but ultimately nothing happening. Unless, half a century later, maybe it just did. So, with the biggest day on the annual American rugby calendar coming up this weekend, the Major League Rugby Championship match, the final, it feels like absolutely prime time to dig in. Can rugby ever break America, or is it destined to eternally be the sporting world's Robbie Williams? The dream of professional rugby in America land is almost as old as professional rugby itself. Between 1997 and 2014, no less than 5 attempts at creating a fully pro all-American rugby competition were announced, and no more than 0 of them got off the ground, had a single game played, all of them looking to not just crack the American market, but correct an issue that cost the sport its starred and striped foothold in the first place. If you had no idea, it sounds extraordinary now, but until August 1995, rugby union was a strictly amateur sport. Players were fined, banned, excommunicated if they ever accepted payment to play. All a hangover from some weird core Victorian era belief that the game was born with, that paying players would endanger the soul of the sport as they'd be no longer playing for the pure joy of the game. In fact, at the first ever World Cup opening ceremony, the event's chairperson even described amateurism as the greatest force for good in the world. This twisted logic was a shot in the foot that created infinite blows to the head. Rugby first stumbled into America in the 1840s, quickly growing in popularity across the first 30 years, particularly as a college sport. The game's physicality, competitiveness, and let's not be shy about it, dual selling points of great way to see discipline and pretty good way to get drunk, made it a huge hit at universities across the land. However, with time, the game started to mutate pretty naturally. Some schools stuck to the old rules, others invented their own, much the same as how rugby football itself was born from other traditional folk football games in England. Before too long, these mutations had unified into one game, a game that became known as American football. These two sports were similar enough that players could slip from one to the other if they moved town to town, like going from playing Halo to Call of Duty. Different games, but if you're good at one, you'll probably still be good at the other two. Yet they had one critical difference they could never overcome. This new version, this American game, was not tied to the old Victorian British bullshit. This was the USA, the land of the free, the brave, and the capitalist. Slowly but surely, all the best contact sport athletes in America moved from playing both, or even just rugby, to only the game they could get paid to play. And bit by bit, rugby disappeared off the map. Had there been a pro league in America 100 years ago, who knows what would have happened, but the sport's foothold was lost, the game suffering a generational slide in the mass market version of Snakes and Ladders. Instead, it would need to wait decades for players to have a realistic path to cash. Even 20 years after amateur status was shrugged, the only games that paid in Eagle Land were for the national team. So if an American rugby player wanted to go pro fully, they were forced to uproot all and move to the UK, France, South Africa, Australia, Japan in order to chase a contract. It made the game incredibly unfavourable to young sports people. Look at Nate Ebner, an incredible athlete who described rugby as his first love, who would openly have stuck with the bigger over ball if given a realistic choice, but the lack of options in America meant a contact athlete of his calibre was always going to convert to the NFL as a teenager. Ebner going on to win 2 Super Bowls before switching back briefly for the 2016 Olympic Games. 2016 was rugby's first appearance at the Ring Show since 1924, where, funnily enough, the USA won a gold medal with a team primarily composed of guys used to playing NFL, and for many, it represented a critical moment in rugby's growth in America. Sevens, the version including the Olympics, is fast, fluid and fantastic fun to watch. In 2024, the Women's Eagles managed to secure the bronze medal against tournament favourites Australia, and it became a sensation, drawing the biggest ever audience for a rugby event in America. Yet, as the team's star player, Alona Maher, recently said in an appearance on Kylie Kelsey's podcast, the problem with Sevens is curious customers can't just go and watch it. The sport structure is built around a touring festival model, giving fans one chance to see a roadshow in their country each year, and whilst the Sevens happens at the upcoming LA Olympics is almost certainly going to be the biggest rugby event America will have ever seen by that point. The shortened form of the game just doesn't give potential fans enough time to become actual fans. You can't just turn up on a weekend and give it a go. Yet the opportunity to do just that did so almost crop up in the same year, as 2016 also gave us one of the most bizarre footnotes in the history of rugby union. Pro Rugby was the brainchild of a New York financier, whatever that means, named Doug Schroninger. The story goes, one day this incredibly rich man was out for breakfast, and at the next table over was a meeting about promoting rugby in the USA. His eavesdropping, probably over pancakes and bacon, saw him fly to England for the World Cup a few months later, and amazed by this corner of the sporting world he never knew existed, he somehow flung together a fully professional sports league in less than a year. Pro Rugby only consisted of 5 teams and 30 games, but it still marked the first time fully professional sides played in the USA, with most of the men's US Eagles squad making the jump and a handful of overseas stars, most notably All Black Centurion Mills Moliena and iconic Italian liability Mirko Bergamasco. Despite some mad and innovative ideas like forcing each team to include a tackle height guideline on their shirt to make the laws clearer to new viewers, the league was short-lived. A few months after their first ever grand final, several members of staff launched a lawsuit against Schroninger for unpaid salaries. One of the 5 clubs then went bust. And on December 20th, 2016, every player from across the 4 remaining sides was informed their contract was being terminated. The league's second season was never formally cancelled, leaving Schroninger's league neither dead nor alive. In the months leading up to its collapse, owners and chairfolk of both the clubs involved and top-tier sides from the amateur game began to talk. There was real feeling from the response to Pro Rugby, and the fat crowds did turn up immediately that there was an appetite for elite men's rugby in the USA from more than just the athletes and administrators themselves. Just perhaps not in the form and manner it had been granted to them a few months earlier. And so, just 9 weeks after the first attempt fell apart, 9 clubs released a joint statement that might as well have just read, "We're going to do it properly this time." Discussions took place at pace, learning lessons from what went before. Instead of one eccentric breakfast mingler holding all the strings, this new league would mimic the ownership model that had made Major League Soccer so robust and sustainable. The league would ultimately own all 9 teams, yet all 9 teams would equal parts own the league. It meant one disaster couldn't capsize everything, but also encourage the teams to be sensible. Dean Howes, who'd operated teams in the NHL and MLS, was brought in to oversee the league, emphasis on building something sustainable that could grow over time, rather than going mass market from the off. And so, on April 21st, 2018, wonderfully, just weeks after the first video plopped onto this channel, the Houston Sabercats took on New Orleans Gold in the first ever game of Major League Rugby. This was an American dream over a century in the making, finally delivered by some lads curbing the classic Yankee optimism for a little bit of realism and pragmatism and delivering on it as a result. MLR is now coming towards the conclusion of its 8th season, and it's grown into one of the coolest leagues in rugby. To watch MLR as a fan of the game in other continents is to feel like you fell into a pocket universe where that fateful mutation never happened. European and American sports are different. They're fundamentally distinct products targeting different audiences. Indeed, it could be argued that the American market's love for the all-conquering dynasty story, a team that conquers all, that dominates, instead of the British affinity for the small underdog side, is something that held back affection for the men's national team for decades. Why would Americans want to watch the one sport where they usually lose? MLR, wisely, has sought not to bridge the gap, but provide an Americanized version of rugby, which, surprisingly, involves something other than just putting Jimmy Fallon in it. The stats-heavy, uber-energetic nature of NFL or basketball coverage is replicated. The college draft built and implemented from their second season, and they've made a real go of trying to get in front of as many eyeballs as possible. Instead of chasing raw dollar, the league's TV deals have been those most likely to get them in front of the greatest number of casual sports fans possible, in the hope someone who did watch the Olympics and think, "Oh yeah, quite like that rugby," will give the league a go. Their free-to-use app, the Rugby Network, also allows fans worldwide to watch the games for free and made sure every single match is televised, so you can watch your team every week and build a real connection. It's allowed the competition to grow year on year. Even when a team goes bust or issues start to arise, so far the league has remained incredibly hardy. MLR was built on similar bones to Major League Soccer, a league that really took over 20 years to find its feet, but has now risen to a pretty stable 5th slot amongst the big American sporting network. MLR feels as though it's very much on that same journey, but early on, steadily trying to turn itself into something that can sit alongside MLS as a very respectable number 6 in the American market. And yet, you wonder if it might be out to get the boost it needs to take off and solidify that footing. 4 score to the day later of MLR's first game, Dave Carney's cousin will send a letter of support towards rugby, backing a USA bid to host the Men's and Women's Rugby World Cup. A matter of weeks later, the announcement was made. In 2031, rugby fans from all over the world will be finding out what Hot Topic smells like and just what it is they sell at Target. Dumping the Rugby World Cup in America is perhaps the ultimate Hail Mary to end that Cold War quiet and finally break America. The 2019 World Cup took rugby from a growing sport in Japan to the most watched TV event in Japanese history in the space of 2 months, and the hope is spreading the world's 3rd biggest sporting event across the states could do the same in America. However, it very much is not that simple. With 6 years left to go, the World Cup is already running into trouble. The traditional September-October window the World Cup's played in overlaps with the start of the NFL, NBA, and NHL seasons, which not only draw away eyes, but venues. A huge number of the NFL stadia World Rugby would be hoping to use will be unavailable for the run of the event, something the organisers demand, that no other events must take place between the first and last game in the venue. The logistics involved in spreading World Cup fever to the entire nation is also incredibly tricky. You can build some hype and interest in host cities as fans from all over the world descend on them, but beyond that, is anybody gonna give a shit in Delaware or Colorado Springs if there's no games taking place there? How do you spread it to anyone other than those in the vicinity of a stadium? The Rugby World Cup in America is possibly the sport's biggest ever gamble. There's no guarantee they'll have stadiums, and even less that they'll pack them out. The game outside a handful of traditional territories is essentially bankrolled by the sheer scale of that tournament that happens every 4 years and how much revenue it brings in. And yet it's going to take an awful lot of work to make this just happen, never mind be a success. It's a scale on which World Rugby have never really worked at before, and even then you have to ask a question. Even in a best case scenario, would a triumphant Rugby World Cup on the scale of the one seen in Japan in 2019 really make a substantial difference to the overall market? I used Robbie Williams as an analogy at the start of the video, and frankly, he fits. Despite being a household name across the rest of the English-speaking world, and legitimately one of the most famous people in the UK, Williams has had about as much success in America as a perfunctory use of the letter U. And then, late last year, Williams had a sudden career surge in the US, thanks to the release of Better Man, a frankly excellent biopic in which the part of Robbie is played by a CGI monkey. The outlandish, high-concept idea that hopefully will be lined up for everyone called Robbie caught plenty of attention, discussion, and rave reviews. Interest in Williams' music increased dramatically in the US. Streams on Spotify and such through the roof. However, as we sit right here, right now some 6-7 months on, those numbers have returned to only just above where they were a year earlier. This is the fate I fear for the 2031 World Cup. Like Better Man, this is the splashiest, boldest, biggest, most expensive way to promote the product, and yet, even when it's great, even when it does well, even when it's talked about, America only just cared. The movie lost money, and 6 months later, 90% of the folk who did engage have forgotten they ever fell in love. The American sports market is arguably even more crowded than cinemas in the contentious joint between Christmas and Oscar season the flick released into. The big 4 American sports hold such a monopoly on the market, the only thing that's traditionally able to steal eyeballs away from them are the Olympics or each other. The NFL is the biggest sports product on earth, and even though games are desperately different, to the casual observer, rugby and football hold enough similarity that they may go, well, we've already got this one at home, why do we need this? As such, if rugby is to succeed in America, it's likely its differences from the NFL it will need to be sold on, rather than the sport's traditional selling points of physicality, intensity, and whatever rugby values are. It'll have to be sold on the increased speed of the game, the condition, fitness-wise the athletes need to be under, rather than the raw size or brutality, and the argument that tactical decisions being made on the fly by the players on the pitch with minimal coaching input can make it, arguably, you can say, a more cerebral or exciting, different prospect as a game. If the World Cup is to be leveraged, the MLR pitch also needs to be rock solid by 2031. Teams need to be stable, set up, and ready. The product is improving on the pitch all the time, with more and more first-rate players jumping over season on season. Yet the true sign of a league is rarely the first-choice players, but what crumbles underneath. And the standard of second-choice players in MLR is the thing that has increased exponentially over the last 8 years. And if they can get their reserves to a similar level to Japan League One or the Pro D2 in France by 2031, it'll bode extremely well for both the league's growth and the USA team at that tournament, frankly. This has been achieved short-term by buying in solid journeyman players from Europe. The likes of Steph Hughes, Damien Hoyland, Henry Trinder, or exceptional players from smaller nations without professional leagues like Uruguay's Manuel Adao and Ignacio Dotti, Namibia's Cleveland Lauser, or the countless South Sea Islanders. But longer term, the only option is to invest in developing talent from within America and giving them a clear pathway to the top, akin to any player in England or France, rather than the excuse to look elsewhere Ebner and that generation decades earlier during amateurism had seen. And, frankly, to MLR's enormous credit, they have recognised that. The organisation now operates a charity called Imagine Rugby, which looks to get the larger oval into kids' hands at primary school age. They understand a pro league is no longer enough on its own. For sport to grow, to be truly successful, it has to be embraced at all levels, beginning with grassroots kids, a handful of which, hopefully, will become the players we pay to watch tomorrow. Maybe not tomorrow, it might be a bit further on than that. Rugby's growth in America is a long-term project. It won't be achieved through one World Cup or one great season of MLR, and yet this roadblock in the market may yet prove to be the thing that truly opens up the sport in the states of America. The American sporting landscape is the most congested and competitive on earth. At least it is for men. It's the elephant in the room I've been deliberately scarcely addressing so far. If rugby is to truly ever grow in the USA, it will happen through the women's game. That isn't speculation, that isn't theorising, that is a fact. I'm a firm believer, and there will be people who turn off at hearing this, and if you're one of them, don't let the homepage hit you on the way out, that there is a good chance, a very good chance, that within my lifetime, women's rugby will outgrow men's. And the key cog in that machine is the USA. Where America didn't even qualify for the last Men's World Cup, and they've won just 3 games in the 8 tournaments they have made, the women have won the whole bloody goddamn thing already. The first organised proper women's rugby teams in the US predate those in the UK. The fairer half of the game has an incredibly proud history in the US. You can make the argument, indeed, that America is women's rugby's true spiritual homeland. In the days when a separate women's rugby union managed the operation for virtually every nation, the USA were the first to fold their men's and women's teams into one organisation, the first to match the badge worn by both national teams. America currently has the second most registered female players of any nation on earth, more than 10 times perpetual World Cup medalists New Zealand and France. Whilst amateurism was a catastrophe for rugby in the States, the game remained an incredibly popular college sport regardless. Because that level is purely amateur, the limit felt less extreme. Infamously, a near endless supply of notorious starred and striped individuals played rugby in college, including former presidents George W. Bush, Bill Clinton and John F. Kennedy. A very decent percentage of the Eagles' greatest ever players took up the game in college, and a bigger chunk yet of them were discovered there, something MLR tapped into with the creation of the annual draft. However, this college platform took on a whole new level of resonance in the women's game. Where men's rugby in America is fighting for relevance at every turn, women's rugby does not have that weird mutation to worry about. The most recent attempt at creating a professional women's American football league was this: the frankly disgusting X-Football, found under the name the Lingerie Football League. I don't have the time or bandwidth to tell you just how angry, frankly, this makes me, but needless to say, if you are a female contact athlete in America, for generations now, rugby has been your calling, not the NFL. College rugby has been open to women since 1972, and the number of schools offering those programs has steadily risen from 3 to 45 at last count, with more jumping on board all the time. This has powered the USA into a much greater force in the women's game. For a long time, a top 5 team, whilst the traditional men's nations professionalising their women's setup has seen them slip down the rankings a little bit, the potential remains there and is only growing, and it took one monumental leap last year. Just under a year ago, Team USA secured a bronze medal in dramatic fashion for the 2024 Olympic Games. It drew not just a record crowd at the time, but a $4 million investment in the women's game from businesswoman Michelle Kang, keen to make it gold in a few years' time, and perhaps even more importantly, some 8 million followers to the team's biggest star. The first true superstar of men's rugby was Arthur Gold of Newport, South Wales. A genius on the pitch, yes, but it was the legends of him climbing trees in his spare time and breaking hurdling records or excelling at cricket that took him into folklore. Alona Marr of Burlington, Vermont, is the first true superstar of women's rugby. A uniquely gifted beast on the field, yet the thing that's propelled her in the spotlight beyond any other rugby player in history is her social media work and the fact that she is just incredibly naturally funny. Perhaps it's those same Victorian era values suggesting nobody should be bigger than the team that's prevented rugby growing true stars in the past, but over the last few years, Marr has reached a platform wider than anyone in rugby, even the Lomus, Wilkinsons, Carters, Khaleesi's and Duponts. And she's done it in a way that feels totally organic and herself, and very 21st century. The game having a true superstar people will pay to watch is huge, obviously, but the more significant component is Alona Mar existing on people's phones and being amazing will help break down any barriers between young girls and boys, let's be honest, turning up at local rugby clubs in America and beyond, or even parents reluctant to take them. Women's rugby is the biggest growth area in the sport, and I think the 1-2 punch of Alona Mar and the upcoming World Cup in England could help take it over the edge for the true test of whether rugby will ever work in America comes. The 2033 Women's Rugby World Cup, which has real potential to be the dawn of a new era for the game at large. Work has already begun on laying those foundations underneath to make it sustainable in turn. Women's Elite Rugby, or WER, were launched earlier this year in a 6-team pilot phase. If the competition can stabilise and then grow, it has a real shot at one day rivaling or overtaking England's Premiership Women's Rugby as the top league in that half of rugby, but also, beyond that, looking at the American market. There are currently 19 fully professional men's sports leagues in America, but just 7 for women. The WNBA is long established and by some way top of the tree. The USA winning 2 of the last 3 women's FIFA World Cups has seen their soccer leagues become wildly popular, but third place consists of ice hockey, yet rugby has a real shot at overtaking it here, which is a much bigger slice of an ever-growing pie than the 6th spot, which feels like the best case scenario for the men. This can, of course, all trickle over. The growth of rugby in America is too grand a project to be divided, even in half into men's or women's. This weekend, the New England Free Jacks go for a record 3rd straight Major League Rugby title against the Houston SaberCats in the current biggest game in the American annual calendar. Just a few weeks later, though, the men's side will play England and the women Fiji in a historic doubleheader in Washington, D.C. Understanding game is to break through, it will take both halves rather than just investing in men or even just in women. The men then embark on qualification for the 2027 World Cup right before their women take on the ultimate task as they play hosts England in the opening match of the Rugby World Cup 2025 on August 22nd. The same statement will permeate rugby clubs all over the world, but the facts are straight and true. USA Rugby has done all the things it can to make it clear. The Cold War is over. The missiles are now in the air. And it's now just up to the American public to decide if they want to be the ones to take it seriously. Thank you for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it. Huge thanks to MLR themselves and Will Hooley, who were huge in helping to make this video, getting it alongside. So thank you to them for being so accommodating as well. Thank you as well to everyone that's watching on Patreon. You make all of this possible, all of this continue to take place. There is plenty more coming. There's some stuff on the Lions tour that is now going on, that is now going up. There's a look at Lions of the Argentina from a few days ago. There's more on the second channel, more Squid Rugby. We'll have plenty more coming over the next few days, and I'll see you very soon then for more rugby.
In their safe hands lies the future of our great game. The best and strongest expression of that refreshing spirit called amateurism, embodying the will to strive for perfection because you believe in something. That is still the most potent force for good in this world.